Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are so sorry for the technical delay, but we appreciate your patience. Thank you for joining us for the Jewish Democratic Council of America's California Senate Primary Issues Forum, hosted by JDCA's California chapters and affiliates. My name is Daniel Brawl, and I serve on JDCA's New Leadership Council. JDCA is the political home and voice of Jewish Democrats, advocating for policies and electing Democratic candidates who share our values. We have held issue forums such as these in numerous congressional districts and states in Democratic primaries like this one to give candidates an opportunity to speak to issues of importance to Jewish voters. We're grateful to the hundreds of you who have joined us today and have been super patient, and I hope you find this forum informative. This Senate seat is of special importance. As the first Jewish woman to serve in the United States Senate, Senator Dianne Feinstein was a trailblazer and remarkable public servant who transformed principled leadership into meaningful action. We hope that the next senator from California will continue her legacy. Today, we are joined by three candidates running in the California Senate primary to succeed Senator Feinstein: Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Katie Porter, and Congressman Adam Schiff. Our conversation will be moderated by JDCA CEO Haley Soifer. Thank you all again for being here and for being patient with us. And I'll pass it over to Haley to explain the forum rules and to begin. Haley, over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm Haley Soifer, CEO of JDCA, and I want to welcome our three candidates and all of our viewers today for the Issues Forum for the California Senate Democratic Primary. As Daniel mentioned, JDCA is the political home and voice of Jewish voters. In 2024, we are mobilizing millions of voters around the country, including in California, helping them make informed decisions at the ballot box with issues forums like this one. Before we begin, I will go over the rules, which have been shared in advance with the candidates. First, this is not a campaign event. Candidates will not be asking for your vote or financial support. They'll share their views on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters. Second, there will be time limits. Candidates will have 1 minute for introductory remarks, followed by questions, in which they will have 1.5 minutes each to answer. Finally, each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 1.5 minute closing statement. The candidates today will appear sequentially. They'll appear one at a time, which is something new for us. After a candidate's closing statement, we will move on to the next candidate for their opening statement and questions until we have heard from all three candidates. As a reminder, we kindly ask the candidates to adhere to the time limits and the rules. We will keep time throughout the forum with a Zoom timer. When the time has expired, a bell will ring, which sounds like this. Thank you. Now that we have gone over the rules, we will begin the forum. We will proceed in alphabetical order of last names, and as such, we will hear from Congresswoman Barbara Lee, followed by Congresswoman Katie Porter, and finally, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congresswoman Lee, welcome and thank you for joining us. You may present your opening statement when you are ready.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. And thank you for lifting up and reminding us of Senator Feinstein, because she was truly a trailblazer on so many issues for California, our country, and our planet. Just a couple of things about my background. I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. For those of you who don't know me, in an immigrant community. My dad was in the military, Lieutenant Colonel. He retired from the Presidio of California. I raised two small children as a single mother. I had some unfortunate circumstances on public assistance, Medi-Cal, food stamps, but I was able to work my way through college, Mills College, University of California at Berkeley. I have a background in mental health, my MSW, and all of my life I have fought for rights, for peace, for justice, and want to take my perspective and my lens into the United States Senate so that I can continue this fight for a climate, for justice, and for peace.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Our first question is on the issue of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. According to the ADL's most recent data, there were over 3,000 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States in the 3 months following October 7th, representing a 360% increase from the same period last year. In addition, protests and threats targeting Jewish individuals, businesses, and institutions have forced the Jewish community to enhance security across the country. What steps have you taken in Congress, and would you take if elected to the Senate to combat the rise of anti-Semitism and hate?
Thank you for that question. As you know, I know what hate is, and I am constantly fighting back anti-Semitism on a variety of fronts. First, legislatively, all of the sentence enhancements, all of the legislation that really raise hate to the level of a crime, that hate speech leads to hate violence. We have to be cognizant of what hate speech does. And on university campuses, including in my own district, I have fought back against anti-Semitism, white supremacy, Islamophobia, LGBTQ plus hate. And so it's very prominent and everywhere. And as you know, as a Black woman, I am very deeply committed to fighting anti-Semitism wherever it emerges. In my own district, I've held meetings with members of the Jewish community to really figure out how we can, first of all, protect people in terms of federal investments. If security needs are needed from the federal government, then I'm there as a member of the Appropriations Committee and would do this in the Senate, get the Department of Justice to help enhance security measures. Secondly, it's important that we, as a member of the Senate, talk and bring people together so we understand that each other's backgrounds, but understand that anti-Semitism is not allowed. It's hate, and we will never stand for allowing that to happen in any form. Finally, I'll just say we have to be sure that First Amendment rights, yes, are speech leads to hate violence.
Thank you. Fighting climate change is an economic and national security imperative and one of the most pressing issues for Jewish voters. Devastating wildfires, air pollution, unsafe drinking water, and floods like those in San Diego last week are some of the ways environmental issues have affected Californians in their daily lives. What policies do you support to address the climate crisis, and how will you ensure that Californians benefit from good-paying green jobs?
I support the Green New Deal. First of all, I was an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, which has the elements of how we move from fossil fuels to a green economy. Born and raised in El Paso, Texas, as I mentioned earlier, and we lived near, well, in a Black and brown community, lived near a smelter where toxic chemicals polluted our communities, and health impacts are so important because for me to address as part of a climate policy in the United States Senate. Where I grew up, Black and brown people had a disproportionate rates of lung cancer, my mother's COPD, bronchitis, you name it. So in the Senate, I want to include this effort to include climate justice in our overall climate policies and make sure that for our workers and employees, we have a true transition in terms of a just transition from positions and jobs and employment in the fossil fuel industry to a green economy. And that means we have to make sure that our labor unions are at the table, that we invest in pension funds, in wages, and in benefits that are comparable to what an employee is making currently, while we do the retraining and the workforce training as we transition into a green economy. California is leading the way, and I want the federal government to use more of California's policies, but move forward and put climate justice as part of the mix.
Thank you. Polling consistently shows that defending abortion access and reproductive freedom is a top priority for Jewish Americans. We would have marked the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade last week had the Supreme Court not struck it down, depriving American women of their reproductive rights. If elected to the Senate, what measures would you support to protect reproductive freedom? And do you support abolishing the Senate filibuster to pass a federal law protecting abortion rights?
First, I have always supported abolishing the filibuster. It's a Jim Crow era policy, and it stops progress, and it really does not allow us to move forward to codify Roe or the right to an abortion into federal law, which I support. I co-chair the pro-choice caucus and have fought to end the Hyde Amendment for many years. I shared a story, my own personal story, which was very difficult to do before Roe having an abortion. I want to make sure that no person has to worry about being criminalized or denied health care, because abortion care is health care. And so this has been a priority of mine, reproductive freedom. I'm proud to be endorsed by the National Organization for Reproductive Freedom. And in fact, it's a priority for me in the Senate to, one, make sure that we codify into federal law the right to an abortion, but also to end the Hyde Amendment, which, you know, impacts Black and brown women disproportionately and low-income women. And we have to make sure that abortion care is seen as healthcare and known as healthcare, and it is. And it's the decision of that individual and their healthcare provider or whomever they want to talk about or counsel with. It's not the decision of any judge or any decision of any elected official. It's a personal decision between that person and their healthcare provider. Full stop, nobody else. And so taking away that decision, that constitutional right, has been something that I have been speaking out against. And
thank you. As Jewish Americans, we understand the importance of humane immigration and border security policies that accepts refugees and asylum seekers and provides pathways to citizenship. Just a few hours ago, a bipartisan deal on climate change, on changes to immigration and border policy was announced, with the Senate set to vote on it as early as next week. What is your view of changes that should be made to U.S. immigration and border policy? And do you think there's a crisis at our border? And if so, what should we be doing about it?
Well, yes, there's a crisis at our border, but let me tell you, I believe that border security won't work without comprehensive immigration reform. We have to have an orderly system. It has to be provided, it has to include due process, and it has to be humane. This country was built on the values of immigration and the rights of people to come to our country within an orderly system. And right now, those laws are not, even our asylum laws right now are not being complied with. And so it's important, and I'm not sure if this border security deal includes the criteria that I want to look at the bill if it gets to the House through that lens. But we've got to understand that immigrants in California have helped build this economy. What Governor Abbott and others are doing by sending immigrants to communities throughout the country, that's dividing immigrants against our residents. And in fact, the federal government should be investing in our communities now so that these immigrants can have a humane pathway to a green card, which I support after 7 years being here, Senator Padilla's bill, but also be able to contribute to their well-being and also to our economy. Jobs in the private sector are their vacancies, and immigrants could fill these jobs. And so immigration policies are policies that have to be humane, they have to be orderly, and they have to be, with due process, which none of that right now, I don't believe is part of our immigration system.
Thank you. We'll now move on to two questions that have incorporated questions that were sent in by the audience. The first one is about Israel. On October 7th, Israel was brutally attacked by Hamas, which perpetrated the largest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. In the nearly 4 months since, Israel has sought to destroy Hamas's infrastructure in Gaza, and the Biden administration has strongly supported Israel's security and right to self-defense. What is your view of Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza, and do you support calls for a ceasefire?
Right away, after the horrific events of October 7th, I condemned this attack, the Hamas attack, condemned terrorism, and understand that I want everyone to understand I've been to the region many, many times, and Israel's security is extremely important. what takes place as it relates to eliminating Hamas is very important. What I don't think will ensure Israel's security is killing 26,000 women and children and civilians. I believe in a two-state solution, and I believe that the path to a two-state solution and peace and security for the Israelis and the Palestinian people is calling for a permanent ceasefire. We have got to, and I hope these negotiations are accomplished, because we saw what took place when there was a ceasefire in November. We've got to make sure that the hostages are released, and we can't do that while this war is taking place. And so I have called for a permanent ceasefire, and I do believe in a two-state solution. And I believe that what is taking place now is counterproductive to Israel's security.
Thank you. Our next audience question relates to affordable housing. Affordable housing remains a top priority and one of the most pressing issues facing people in California. High costs of rent and housing have plagued California for decades, and far too many people lack housing and experience homelessness. If elected to the Senate, how would you work to address this important issue for those in California?
Housing is a big issue for me. It's a top priority issue, and the affordability crisis in California is directly related to the cost of housing and the cost of childcare, and the fact that wages have not kept up with the cost of living. I know, unfortunately, I had a time in my life when I did not have a place to live. I was unsheltered, and it's important that we see, first of all, and acknowledge the fact that housing is a basic human right. If we acknowledge that, then we're going to have policies that, one, do not allow people to be evicted. And so I support a national eviction policy, but also we must create more affordable housing and support more low-income housing tax credits and support new ways of building housing. Also, in California, we have, 2,500, 3,000 just for a one-bedroom apartment in some places, one-bedroom house. We have to help people with deposits so they can get shelter. And right now, I'm working on my bill that I want to continue in the Senate that would make investments in HUD that would provide $10,000 to $15,000, which is what people need just to be able to rent a safe place to live. And that's unconscionable that we have to come up with $10,000 or $15,000 if you're a minimum wage worker. And so we have to see a housing and affordable housing as, one, building more affordable housing, two, making sure that low-income people have access to security deposits, three, making sure that the rent is such that Section 8 vouchers are expanded and other.
Thank you. You now have the opportunity for a 1.5-minute closing statement.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I think that what your agenda is, and I appreciate being able to read all the issues that you all are champion, because your fights have been my fights and continue to be. Fixing our democracy is extremely important. I'm the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit against Donald Trump, Proud Boys, and the Oath Keepers. It is important to me that we hold Donald Trump accountable. And in fact, I called for his impeachment in 2019. Secondly, voting rights is extremely important to me. I know what it is not to be disenfranchised, and I'm very aligned with you in our fight to make sure that we address voter suppression and enhance our voting rights, not only in California, but throughout the country. I think California is leading the way in voter participation, but we have a long way to go. And in the Senate, I would want to champion our John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and all the other advancement acts for voting rights. Also, when you look at the fact that the economy is not working here for everyone in California, and I want to be a champion for those 20 million people who live one paycheck away from poverty in California. California is a wealthy state. We shouldn't have people who make $15 an hour having to commute 2 and 3 hours a day to work because they can't afford to live in their community. And so we must, and I want to champion in making sure that we raise the minimum wage to a living wage, because that's the only way people can afford to stay in California, raise their families and children. And it's a dream. So thank you all again very much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We appreciate it. We appreciate you adhering to these time limits. I know it's truly not enough time for each answer, and I'm sorry about that, but it is the way we're going to get through all three candidates. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right. We will now move on to the second candidate, Congresswoman Katie Porter. Congresswoman Porter, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As a quick reminder, this is the structure. First, we will have 1 minute for opening statements. That will be followed by 6 questions, including audience questions, which we will have 1.5 minutes to answer. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to make a 1.5 minute closing statement. You may not ask for the audience vote or financial support, and we ask that you please adhere to the time limits as displayed by the Zoom timer on the right of your screen. And as you may have heard, we also have a buzzing noise, so you will know when the time is up. Congresswoman Porter, you may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to get this back on schedule, back on time for all of you, because I'm so grateful for you. Look, Washington is broken. Career politicians have failed decade after decade to take meaningful action on our most pressing problems. Sometimes that has been in service to corporate donors who thrive on the status quo. There is an urgency and a scale of challenges that we are facing, from housing affordability to climate change to hate speech, that demand bold leadership, leadership that has never been for sale. So I'm really proud to be the only elected official in this race who has never taken corporate PAC money and who refuses donations from lobbyists. I didn't change my stance on campaign finance in this race to boost my credibility. It's core to who I am as a consumer protection advocate and how and why I do Washington differently. California has an amazing opportunity to elect a bold vision with their new senator, and I'm excited to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We'll now move on to questions on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters, starting with voting rights. JDCA has strongly supported efforts to defend democracy and the right to vote through federal legislation. Meanwhile, Republicans across the country have enacted voter suppression laws and espoused election denialism to weaken our democratic institutions. If elected to the Senate, what measures would you support to counter restrictive voting laws, ensure free and fair elections, and safeguard our democracy from ongoing Republican threats?
Thank you for your question. Look, I'm going to be honest with everyone on this Zoom. I think that Barbara Lee and Adam Schiff and I are all in the same place on this one, and that is something we should celebrate. We have all been champions on supporting the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the For the People Act. And I think it's important that we help voters who care about issues, whether it's abortion, gun violence prevention, anti-Semitism. We help them understand that these things are all not, we're not going to make progress on these issues unless we address the problems that our democracy faces. I strongly support getting rid of gerrymandering. I think California has a model that was adopted in HR 1 of having a citizen commission. And I'm someone who's been through that process. And so I think I can speak very powerfully to how and why it works, since I was redistricted in a very big way last cycle. I also think it's important that we recognize that until we give voters confidence that our democracy is not for sale, until we lead differently as Democrats with regard to how we fund our campaign, we are going to lose credibility to reach swing voters and persuadable Republicans, as well as engage younger Democrats on the issue of safeguarding our democracy.
Thank you. I will now turn it over to Andrew Lackman, the president of Democrats for Israel, an affiliate organization of JDCA, to ask the next question about anti-Semitism. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you on behalf of Democrats for Israel, California. Anti-Semitism is at an all-time high in the United States and all around the world. According to the FBI, although Jews make only 2.4% of the American public, they account for 60% of religiously motivated hate crimes. Protests targeting Jewish businesses and institutions have forced Jewish Americans to take new security precautions amongst rising threats. What policies do you support to combat anti-Semitism and keep our community safe?
So hate has no place in our communities, and it is on all of us to combat that. I think that's true in all of the forms of hatred that we are seeing on the rise, but it is especially true and important to understand that anti-Semitism has often been the kind of most pernicious, most base form of hate that is often linked and used to then foment hate and hate crimes toward others, including the LGBTQ population and the Black population. So everybody needs to be engaged in combating anti-Semitism. I fought for and delivered more federal funding for our community-based organizations to combat hate crimes, including against the Jewish community. So in the 2022 budget bill, I supported that, and I was also an early backer of President Biden's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. I've worked with educators, for example, to bring educational programming to my district. For example, I was the first congressperson to ask the Holocaust Museum to bring their exhibit on America during the war and run up to World War II to Orange County. I've also worked closely with the ADL on the issue of online hate, hosting a town hall with them during the pandemic about how to combat online hate. And I have a new bill that I am working on that'll roll out shortly that would require social media companies to do more on content moderation and make those policies more transparent so we can address anti-Semitism online as well as in our communities.
Thank you so much. Our next question relates to the economy. Decades of Republican tax cuts and financial deregulation have deepened inequality and hurt American workers. While President Biden's economic policy has raised taxes on corporations, cut costs for families, and lowered unemployment and inflation, more needs to be done. If elected, how would you strengthen the economy and reduce inequality?
The economy has been something that brought me to Congress, working as a consumer advocate, seeing how big corporations use their power to rig the rules in Washington in their favor, and we're seeing the results in the deepening inequality that we face. This is a huge challenge to our having a strong, stable, globally and competitive economy going forward. I have, with or without my whiteboard, I have been willing in congressional hearings to point squarely at this problem. For example, pointing out that over half of the inflation that we dealt with in the wake of the pandemic was caused by corporate consolidation and monopoly profits and price gouging, not by rising costs of labor or rising costs of supply goods. I'm a big believer in President Biden's competition policy, making sure that we're cracking down on monopoly power. I think that is really important. I'm also a strong champion for labor rights. I believe that every worker should have the right to organize. And I've also tried to tackle the biggest cost that is really crippling our families today, which is housing. That is my #1 priority, as well as addressing the rising costs of childcare. The simple fact is families cannot, without help from the federal government, structurally changing our economy, whether it's through the tax code or through addressing the cost, cannot manage to deal with the costs of housing, childcare, and college. So even as President Biden has done important work in conjunction with Congress, which I've been proud to vote for, to lower families' costs, those big three costs are still swamping families.
Thank you. Polling consistently shows that defending abortion access and reproductive freedom is a top issue for Jewish Americans. For Jews, this issue is one of both justice and religious freedom. Jewish law requires abortion in some cases, and abortion bans are an infringement on both our bodily autonomy and our religion. Do you support abolishing the Senate filibuster to pass a federal law protecting abortion rights?
Yes, and I support abolishing the filibuster, period. I should be clear, because I don't think we're going to be able to do the work we need to do on voting rights either, unless we abolish the filibuster. Look, I have a lot of experience talking to swing voters about abortion, and I know how to talk about this issue in a way that wins every vote that we need while not backing away from the core principle of supporting abortion rights. This is a freedom issue. And as you rightly point out, it also is, for the Jewish community, a religious freedom issue. Every person, every family should be free to make their own choice about when and if to have a child, and if and when an abortion is right for them. This is not an area in which government should be making decisions, and that's what the vast majority of Americans believe. think one of the things I bring to this race is my ability to talk about this issue in a way that respects those who have different views and ask them to be allies in supporting everyone's ability to make their own decision. I think I've been a champion, of course, for the Women's Health Protection Act, which would be a nationwide protection for abortion. I think we also need to, of course, address the issues with our Supreme Court. But in the meantime, we have to help voters understand this is up to them. There will be a nationwide abortion ban in this country, including in states like California that have worked hard to protect abortion rights if Republicans control the presidency and the House and the Senate. So I think we cannot talk about this issue enough, both because of its importance and because of the threats it's under.
Thank you. We will now move on to two questions where we've incorporated those provided by the audience. The first is about Israel. On October 7th, Israel was brutally attacked by Hamas in the largest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust, killing approximately 1,200 and taking 240 hostage. In November, 105 hostages were released, but more than 100 remain in Gaza, being held in harsh conditions by Hamas. What can be done to ensure hostages, including 6 Americans, are released immediately? In addition, please clarify your position with regard to U.S. policy toward Israel at this difficult time.
So we need to be squarely focused that this conflict is unlikely to end if we do not secure the safe and as rapid as possible release of the remaining hostages. That is, I just know a path to a durable ceasefire and to ending this conflict and to restoring the sense of security that Israel deserves, as well as making sure that we can end the harm that this conflict is causing, endangering Israeli and Palestinian lives if we don't get the hostages released. So I think it's really important that the United States, as Israel's ally, push Israel's leadership to focus squarely on this issue. We should all want a ceasefire. We are hearing tragic stories of lost lives by Israeli soldiers and their families, of course, as well as by Palestinians. So I think it's important to recognize, what does it mean to be a strong ally to Israel? It's not enough to just say the words that you stand by Israel, just as it's not enough to say that you support a ceasefire. I have really worked to try to put out thoughtful statements that reflect the complexity of this issue. And so I think we need to identify what are the conditions, what needs to happen on the ground to bring the parties to this conflict, Israel and Hamas, to a permanent ceasefire. I think that means that we need to push for things that include not only an immediate release of the hostages, a plan to rebuild Gaza. We need to think about how to eradicate Hamas as leaders of Gaza. I don't see a path to a permanent ceasefire with regard to that. And I've been proud to support a two-state solution consistently.
Thank you. Final question. Following the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, there's been a flood of money in politics, which no doubt impacts elections. Please describe steps you have taken to encourage campaign finance reform and steps you hope to take on this issue if elected to the Senate.
I've really tried to lead on this issue by example. There is zero doubt that we need to end Citizens United, that we need to pass a constitutional amendment if necessary to change our campaign finance system and to shake up the Supreme Court in a path to doing that. But we cannot let those structural barriers stop each of us from showing leadership on this issue. Every election that goes by, that people see dark money and corporate money influencing elections is an election that weakens our democracy. And so I first ran for Congress in 2018. I made the decision then to never take corporate PAC money. I also don't take federal lobbyist money. I don't take money from executives, big oil, big banks, big pharma. These entities have too much power to control the conversation in Washington, and ordinary Americans don't have enough. So I am very concerned about the fact that we have 2 generations now almost of voters who have only ever known a democracy in which corporate money and big money dominated. So I've been proud to show that you can raise the money you need to win the very most expensive House race that, like mine was last cycle, and you can do it with a grassroots army and without corporate money. So I think we need a leader who acts to strengthen our democracy with their actions, as well as talking about that issue, but really demonstrating it through how you lead your own campaign.
Thank you for your responses to the questions, including within the time limits. We appreciate it. And you now have the opportunity for 1.5 minutes of a closing statement.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be talking with you and appreciate all your advocacy. Look, we cannot continue to sell our democracy off to the highest bidders, from big oil to big banks. We have too many politicians who get to Washington on Wall Street's dime, and it shows through decades of inaction on issues like taxes and inequality, through watered down guardrails to protect our planet, and even blatant corporate giveaways. I am not beholden to special interests, and I'm not afraid to call out Washington's traditions that by design benefit Wall Street over workers. Traditions like schmoozing with lobbyists or taking millions from corporate PACs. I'm not afraid to take on the big fights and to win, holding corporate CEOs and government officials to account. I'm proud to have already written new laws to take on big pharma's unfair price hikes, to improve mental health care, to hold polluters accountable, and to boost the oversight of big insurance. I have proven that I cannot be bought to look the other way when corporate special interests threaten our democracy and cheat everyday Americans. I think this is the bold, unapologetic leadership that the US Senate needs to solve our biggest problems, from housing unaffordability to climate change to income inequality. I think it's important that we shake up the status quo in Washington and restore confidence in our democracy and deliver for Californians. Thank you so much for your participation and for having me today.
Thank you so much. We will now move on to the third and final candidate joining us today, Congressman Adam Schiff. Welcome, Congressman Schiff, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thanks. As a reminder, there is a structure in terms of time. You will have 1 minute for opening statements, followed by 6 questions, which you will have 1.5 minutes each to answer. And finally, you'll have the opportunity for a 1.5 minute closing statement. You may not ask for the audience vote or financial support, and we ask that you please adhere to the time limits as displayed by the Zoom timer on the right side of your screen. So, Congressman Schiff, thank you again, and you may now begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Haley. And I just want to change the screen so I can see the timer, which I do not have on my screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's a treat to be with you. I thought maybe I would start out telling you a little bit about myself that you may not know from watching me during hearings or in other ways. I'm married. My wife is named Eve. I'm originally from Boston. My father was in the schmata business. He was a traveling salesman. We moved to the Bay Area when I was 11. Where I went to Temple Isaiah and was bar mitzvah there. And I have been very much guided by my Jewish faith, certainly in terms of Tikkun Olam, but even more so by a passage from Micah. What is required of us but to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God? To me, those are great inspirations for my work. I'm grateful to you at JDCA for all that you do, living Jewish values, supporting Democratic candidates, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. We will now move into questions on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters. We will start with gun violence. Gun violence is a uniquely American crisis, and at this point, a full-blown epidemic affecting our communities, our schools, our places of worship. Last year, there were more than 630 mass shootings, yet Republicans continue to obstruct the passage of meaningful gun safety legislation, including a ban on assault weapons. What gun safety measures do you support, and how do you propose taking action on this issue if elected to the Senate?
It is so appalling to me that we have to suffer these tragedies time after time after time. When we know it would work. We know an assault weapons ban would work. We know universal background checks work. We know a ban on extended ammunition clips would work. We know that my bill, which President Biden has said may be the single most important to do away with the gun industry's immunity from liability would also work. What has been lacking is the congressional will and courage of elected officials to do something about it. This is, predominantly, almost exclusively now, a Republican problem. And the only way I think we're going to get very meaningful gun safety legislation passed is by doing away with the filibuster, which I also support doing away with for a variety of other reasons, including restoring voting rights, restoring reproductive freedom. But I don't think we're going to be able to take significant action on gun safety unless we do that. And I'm going to fight to do away with the filibuster, to pass an assault weapons ban, to protect our communities. My wife and I have had the same terrible phone call that too many other families have from one of our kids at school, that they're in lockdown, that there's a shooter not far from campus, that they're fine. And thank God they were fine. But for too many other families, it's a very different kind of call. And it's appalling we haven't addressed this. I'm going to fight to do away with the filibuster so we can finally take action.
Thank you. Now on to a critically important issue for Jewish voters, and that's the future of our democracy. Following your work on the first Trump impeachment and on the January 6th committee, you were removed from the Intelligence Committee and censured by House Republicans. Your experience in the House epitomizes the threats posed to our democracy by Republican extremists. Please elaborate on these threats and, if elected to the Senate, measures you would support to defend our democracy.
I never imagined we would see a fraction of what we've seen over the last 6 years in terms of the relentless assault on our democracy, its institutions, or that a leading candidate for president in one of America's two great political parties would be someone who led an insurrection against our own government, incited violence against our own government in the first ever attempt by a president to cling to power after losing. That he continues to enjoy the support of that party is both flabbergasting and extremely dangerous. I was proud to lead the investigation of Donald Trump, proud to lead the first impeachment trial and to serve on the January 6th committee. I'm going to continue to hold anyone accountable who would tear down our institutions. I have also authored the Protecting Our Democracy Act, our own set of post-Watergate reforms designed to enshrine in law a lot of the norms that were broken down over the last 4 years. We need a leader in the Senate that can take on these big fights, that is, yes, willing to stand up to the Trumps and McCarthys, to get censured, to get attacked, to get vilified, to get the death threats that go with it, to protect our democracy. If we don't protect our democracy, then none of the other priorities are going to matter very much. And so this is, I think, the essential obligation of the next senator from California is to defend our institutions and pass on this cherished legacy to the next generation.
Thank you. Amid the startling rise of anti-Semitism, the Biden White House has demonstrated leadership with the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. What more can and should be done to combat anti-Semitism by Democrats? And if elected to the Senate, what measures specifically would you support to combat the rise of anti-Semitism and hate?
Well, I obviously feel this issue very keenly, being the subject of a lot of anti-Semitic hate online. I've had more than my fair share directed against me and members of my family, and of course feel keenly this hostility to Jewish students on campus, students who don't feel safe going to class. I've talked to parents who tell me their kids are thinking about taking a year off at some of the most elite universities. I'm the only candidate in this race who has consistently voted for each of the anti-Semitism resolutions that have come before the Congress this year, or actually, I guess it's now last year. And I'm going to continue by taking on the social media companies. I've taken Twitter to task over the explosion of hate as documented by ADL on that platform, only to receive a response on Twitter from Elon Musk that said, "I'm glad you lost your chairmanship. You have a very small brain." This is what we're up against. And I'm going to continue to use my bully pulpit to push back. I'm going to continue to provide resources to the FBI and also oversight of the FBI to make sure that they're cracking down on anti-Semitic hate. and in every other respect, push back against this terrible scourge that Jewish community has endured for millennia.
Thank you. Restrictions on abortion access disproportionately affect and burden marginalized and low-income communities seeking abortion care. If elected to the Senate, what measures would you support to protect reproductive freedom and improve access to reproductive health care services for marginalized communities? In addition, do you support abolishing the filibuster to codify Roe and pass federal legislation for protecting abortion access?
Yes, I certainly do support abolishing the filibuster to pass a national right to abortion law, of which I'm proud to co-sponsor. What the Supreme Court did in the Dobbs decision was a terrible tragedy that has endangered the lives of millions and millions of people. It has also meant that thousands and thousands of women have had to carry to term the child of their rapist. And we not only need to pass a national right to abortion law, but I'm one of the lead authors in the House of legislation to expand the size of the Supreme Court, to impose term limits on the court, to essentially unstack and rebalance the court, which was stacked by Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, by withholding a confirmation from Barack Obama for almost a year while jamming one down the nation's throat during Trump's last weeks in office when people were literally already voting for Joe Biden. So I'm proud to be very strongly pro-reproductive freedom, to have been a champion of reproductive freedom since my first days in office. And I'm going to fight to do away with that filibuster so we can restore reproductive freedom for millions. And going to continue in every way in terms of making sure insurance policies cover reproductive freedom, that we get rid of the Hyde Amendment, which impacts a lot of communities of color disproportionately, so that abortion access is there for every American.
Thank you. We will now move on to two questions that have incorporated audience questions about foreign policy. In late October, President Biden pledged billions of dollars of assistance for Ukraine and Israel, which Congress has not yet funded. Do you support this assistance to Israel specifically without cuts or conditions? And what is causing the delay? Second question, what is your position with regard to a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas?
Well, first of all, with respect to aid to Israel, yes, I support it without cuts or conditions. Unconditionally support that package the president has proposed. And I was very angry when Speaker Johnson decided to condition that aid on cuts to the IRS with the false argument that that would somehow be the fiscally responsible thing to do, since cuts to the IRS, among other things, would only increase the cost of the bill. But more than that, we've never conditioned aid to an ally at war with an unrelated policy issue. That is a terrible road to go down, and just allows hostage taking in terms of the legislative process. So I support that aid unconditionally. In terms of a ceasefire and a very different hostage situation, I don't support a permanent ceasefire while Hamas is continuing to control Gaza, while Israeli and American citizens are continuing to be held hostage. And I don't know how you can ask a nation which has both a right and a duty to defend itself, like Israel, to cease fire under these conditions. I do support humanitarian pauses to get aid in and to get hostages out. I hope the current negotiations are successful in bringing about another pause for that purpose. But I support Israel's right to defend itself. And Hamas, it's tragic, is using Palestinians as human shields. And I grieve the loss of so many Palestinian lives as a result of Hamas using them as human shields.
Thank you. And our final question. Less than a week ago, 3 U.S. service members were killed in Jordan, reportedly by an Iranian-supported proxy group. Since then, the Biden administration has weighed possible responses to the attack. How should the United States respond to ongoing Iranian threats in the Middle East, which has certainly increased since October 7th?
I think the administration should respond to these attacks in a strong way, in a proportionate way, in a way that is calculated to deter Iran and its proxies, but is also calculated not to widen the war. I think one of the things that the Biden administration has done very effectively and is extremely important is do everything possible not to widen the conflict. I would be desperately concerned for Israel's safety if it had to fight a two-front war in the north against the Iranian Hezbollah proxies and in the south against the Iranian proxies in Hamas, not to mention the Houthis. And so I think it needs to be a strong response that deters, but I also think that it has to be undertaken in a way that does not provoke a wider war. And I think the administration has so far walked that very difficult line very well. And I also want to say, how heartbroken I am over the loss of these American lives, these service members who are there fighting ISIS and helping to protect us from a different terrorist group. But I think the president should respond. He will respond. I think it will be a multi-level response. But I think he will also have that strategic imperative in mind of deterring more attacks, but also preventing a widening of the war.
Thank you so much for your responses to the questions, and within the time limit, we appreciate it. You may now give a 1.5-minute closing statement.
Thank you very much. Thanks again. Let me end where I began by thanking you for the work you're doing, supporting great candidates around the country. I've been proud to work with you for many years now, supporting Democratic candidates, raising money for them, including one of my colleagues in this race. And helping elect great Democrats to the House and Senate. It's something I want to continue to do as a U.S. Senator. I'm running for the Senate and hoping to go to the Senate to provide leadership when it comes to defending our democracy and our institutions, leadership in the big fights. During that existential struggle of our democracy during the last 4 years, and I hope there's never another 4 years, of Donald Trump, I was in the center of that fight. But California also needs a senator that knows how to get things done. You can walk down the halls of Congress and trip over 5 people saying they're going to shake up the place. But what are rare, what is hard to find in the Congress are people who actually know how to get things done. I'm proud to have authored California's Patient Bill of Rights. I'm proud to have authored legislation to bring up-to-date textbooks to our schools. I'm proud to have brought back millions to find shelter for those who are homeless. I'm proud to have helped build the early earthquake warning system in California and up and down the west coast of the country. I'm proud to have authored legislation on press freedom. And I'm running because Californians need a senator who can lead in those big fights, but also knows how to get things done.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our candidates for being with us today. Thanks to all of you for joining us. While we touched on some of the issues of importance to Jewish voters, we didn't have time to get to everything, and we encourage everyone to learn more about these 3 candidates' positions by visiting their websites and visit jewishdems.org to learn about issues of importance to Jewish voters, how you can advocate, and how we will mobilize millions of voters in advance of the November election, including in California. I'd now like to invite our partner in Northern California, Doreen Castleman, to close the event with some important information about voting in California. Doreen.
Thank you, Haley. My name is Doreen Castleman. I'm the president of the Jewish Democratic Club of Silicon Valley, an affiliate of JDCA. I want to thank the candidates and all of you for joining us today and for being with all of our partners and with our 2 organizations. We are here today to be able to learn so much more. Forums like these are critical for Jewish voters as we prepare to vote. We hope that you learn more about the candidates and that you are inspired to take action. The California primary is March 5th, and early voting begins February 4th. And of course, the general election is on November 5th. We encourage you all to make your plan to vote and support Democrats this election.